Welcome to another episode from Pods with Posh and Paul. Today we're delighted to have Emma Woodward on board. Welcome, Emma.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Emma, you are an educational psychologist with over 20 years experience working with our young people, schools and community. And you've come on board today to talk about what it's like for us being in our bubbles and trouble in our bubbles, and how we can work with our children when we are in lockdown and in small confined spaces.
That's about right, yeah. And what we can do, some real practical tips on what we can do to kind of push through this last part before we hopefully come down to level 3 and start resuming a little bit more of the ability to go outside of our bubble.
Yeah, so where, because obviously we're in week 3 now, so we've just come over the hump, we've come over hump day, and things are feeling maybe sometimes a little bit fractious, and the children are going back to school. So where do you suggest we start this week?
So I think really focusing on relationships, and it's almost like we've had 2 weeks. The first week's a little bit of shock and kind of adaptation. The second week's a bit like, oh, this is a bit cruisy. And third week is a bit like mile 18 of a marathon. You're kind of hitting the wall a little bit, aren't you? You can see the end, but you're running out of steam. And I think this is the time really when we need to be focusing on our relationships and our connections with each other, and be mindful of the fact that as of today, children hypothetically go back to school. It's the end of the school holidays. We've also got another hat to put on, and that is potentially as teacher. So how do we manage all of that within ourselves and between ourselves to keep everyone happy, safe and calm? Because I think I'm not the only parent. We've got many children between us, and it is getting a little bit tough to keep everybody entertained and remove that sense of Groundhog Day to everything, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we've got 12 children between us, haven't we, of different ages. And what you say so rings true to me. I've got 4 teenagers in the house of varying needs. And you're talking about relationships being okay. And I listen to it and I think, I don't actually know how to make those relationships okay. We've got a teenager that's come back from England, meant to be at university over there. Teenager that's come back from university in Wellington. One at school, one now on holiday from school because one's a private school, one's not. Such different needs. And I'm thinking, how do I juggle all that and keep them all happy? And I don't feel as I can. So what do you say to parents that are actually struggling with those relationships right now and hormones in very confined spaces?
I think take them one by one. But first, the main relationship that needs to be okay is the relationship that we have with ourselves. So understanding our own boundaries, our own limitations, our own temperament, what we can do, what we can't do, and be very clear about that, and be okay to ask for help and recognise our early overwhelm cues. Because I don't know about you, but when I become overwhelmed, I wish I was a crier. I'm not, I'm a shouter. And that's when I need somebody or myself to recognise, like, time out for me now, because what I'm doing is corroding relationships rather than building relationships. So the first thing we need to be doing is checking in with ourselves and our own load and making sure that we're okay to be doing that. So making sure as much as you can, and I've got 4 small children, so it's very tricky for me to do this, but making sure where I can that I do get time out to kind of so I can be present in my brain and be the thinking brain for my family.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that we need to be doing, is being kind and compassionate on ourselves. We're very good at being compassionate for our kids and for our friends, and sometimes we're not very good at being compassionate to ourselves. So just recognising we're being asked to do a lot right now. We're mothers, we're teachers, we're wives, we're sisters, we're friends, we're all of these different things, and we just need to be, and we're being asked to adapt to a situation that was thrust upon us very, very quickly. And there'll be a huge amount of our unconscious that's doing a lot of processing. We don't have as much access to our thinking brain as we normally do. We don't have our cognitive capacity like we normally do. We don't have our external resources like we normally do. I don't know about you, but normally when I'm feeling a bit topped out, I'll go for a walk. I can't do some of those things. So we have to be compassionate with ourselves and accept that things have shifted. And this is going to be a tough week. There's lots of research from, although this is quite different, but from home detention, people who are under house arrest and home detention. Week 3 is often the hardest week. So we just really need to be aware that it's a psychological phenomena. This week is going to be tough. So the best thing we can do is check in with ourselves so we can focus on our relationships. And then make space to have those one-on-one time with each of those. So you've got 4 teenagers in your house with varying different needs, but you know those kids. You know them inside out. Remind yourself that you know them, and just be aware of what you think they might need and acknowledge and validate their feelings right now.
And I think it's also key to note that we actually can't make everybody happy, can we? So I think I really like your point when you said about checking in with yourself, because, you know, as you say, we do wear so many hats, and understanding the signs. Like I'm either a crier or a shouter. I go either way. But either way, I know none of them are actually that great at the time. So if I just pop off to the loo and just shut the door and reground, and sometimes it's as simple as that, isn't it? Wash your hands, wash your face, take 3 deep breaths, because we are in close confined space. We can't just run away, and we do have responsibilities. You can't just leave the children, unfortunately. That's a really nice point, because we can't make everybody happy, but however, if we're looking after ourselves, then we're more inclined to be able to cope with everything else that's going on.
And that's a really good point you've said there about coping, is that my husband has a very different coping strategy to this situation than I do, and I can become very irritated by that very easily. If I don't remember, that's him coping, and I cope this way, he copes that way. And if I change the mindset from irritation to complementary coping strategies, he covers that off, I cover that off, it feels better instantly in my head. So it's about switching some of the thought processes that you had, because resentment is really quick to build when you're squashed together quite closely in confined spaces. I've nearly locked my 3-year-old in the pantry several times this week.
I love that we can be so honest.
I love the way you talk about actually time out for ourselves as well, because the automatic response sometimes, as you say, is to get cross or to cry, and to go into the situation of frustration and anxiety or tension and try and resolve it there and then. But I love what you say, because it's sometimes quite good as a parent to remove ourselves, isn't it? Maybe if there's another parent in the house, to go for a quick walk, to have a breather, and to not engage in it there and then, to come back when we're calmer ourselves. Because as you say, we are the ones, we're managing the bubble, aren't we? And if we're not okay, then the bubble's not okay. And I like that reminder. It's interesting also though, because I've got one that's highly anxious. How do we do with anxiety at this time? Because the natural tools I would use with that child, I'm not able to do at this time. And obviously children that are in support or therapy, seeing a counsellor, maybe are not now having that time with that external support. How do we manage anxiety in the home at this time in lockdown?
I think that's a really good question. And I think the main thing that we can do is acknowledge, validate, normalise and contain. So acknowledge that things do feel scary, and that those feelings are valid. You know, that is that person's reality at the moment. We're not going to go and try and talk them out of their anxiety, but often the most helpful response is I hear you, I see you. Have you seen that lovely video from Brené Brown about the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Yeah, wonderful.
It's lovely, isn't it? And if people haven't seen it, I do recommend that you do watch it. And often the healing moment is not in the problem solving or trying to make things better, but in the I understand that this is difficult for you, and feeling that somebody sees you and can hold your hand and tolerate your story on your behalf for you. And I think that's what we need to be doing. But going back to the original point, we need to be okay to be able to do that. We need to have space in our own stuff to hold their stuff and process it for them.
So it's about being safe, is it? And contain safety, security, reminding them of what is okay in their lives, and actually engaging in the fact that you're listening and there for them.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it depends on different levels. So if you've got an older child, you can have a conversation with them around, you know, is that a helpful thought or is that a harmful thought? You know, you can keep thinking that thought, but is it going to make you feel better or make you feel worse? And ultimately, do you have any control over the thing that you're thinking about anyway? We don't have much control at the moment, and that is inherently anxiety provoking. So I think mainly the script that we can share with people when they're old enough to be able to understand it, is that helping or is it harming? If it's helping, continue doing it. If it's harming, should we think about something else that we can do?
Yeah, I like it. Simple tips, and it's very I think they're really good simple tips for parents to take with them and to be able to talk to their teenager like that. So I think that's really, really helpful for our listeners, definitely. And we know if we feel anxious, sometimes, you know, we go and talk to our friends. We don't expect them to solve our problems, do we? We just want to actually offload and get it out there. And we don't want to be made to feel stupid or silly. We just actually want it to be okay that we feel like that.
And that's a really good point. We often have different people that we go to for different things. So if I want something fixed, I'll talk to my husband about it. If I want someone to hear me, I'll talk to my best friend. And this is a way that kids and young people, tech is a really good thing at the moment, because peers are inherently more important than family members when kids are adolescents. You don't need me to tell you that, you know. And so having access to technology to be able to continue those containing, calming conversations is really important to older children and adolescents at the moment. And I don't think now's the time to be thinking about reducing their screen time, because actually that's a way that they're going to get some of those anxiety containing relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And Emma, do you think children are also experiencing a sense of grief that they're not able to express, in the sense that they've lost a lot of things in their life, in their external world that they relied on? It might have been just routine. It might have been the school environment. It might be things they go to that suddenly shut down overnight, and there's a sense of grief there that we're not recognising as parents, or even minor trauma.
Yeah. So interestingly, I think, first of all, different kids have different temperaments. So some children probably aren't bothered at all and are just enjoying having their parents around and not doing much during the day and enjoying the lack of structure. Other children, routine is extremely important to them. And I think you need to know your child the best to be able to understand how much that's affected them. But there will be definitely a sense of loss or change, and change is inherently stressful. Our emotional brain, our amygdala doesn't like change at all. It likes things to be predictable and certain. So there will be that to it. We don't know what's coming next. Bearing in mind, and this is a big shout out to Jacinda, she's been doing a great job in parenting the nation, hasn't she, in explaining very calmly and clearly and rationally where we are, why we're doing this and what's coming next, and saying, I can't tell you much further than that, but when I know, I will tell you. And that's a brilliant model to be doing with our kids too. That's a wonderful thing that she's been doing. But yeah, I think just acknowledge that it's a very difficult, different kind of time. Day to day, minute to minute might not feel that odd, but when you start broadening it out and thinking about the wider stuff, it can feel quite overwhelming, can't it? Because we don't know what's coming next, and we don't know what the knock-on effect of this situation is going to be for the future. So I think just being aware that that might be an issue for our kids is really, really important too.
Yeah, that's lovely. So we've going to cover relationships, so we're going to work on our relationships this week. We're not going to get too stressed about tech. We're going to allow our teenagers to just do their thing on the tech because it's really important to them, and we're going to make sure we are okay. So tune in with ourselves. Is there any other tips that we can give to our listeners today?
I think mainly you just need to be good enough. Don't be all things to all people. You can only do what you can do, and only you know what tools and resources you have to fulfill the roles that you have to do at the moment. So the biggest thing that we can do is just be mindful and aware of our own capacity and our own load, and make sure that they balance out. Because if we're okay, our bubble will generally be okay.
And extending that, Emma, we are in New Zealand. We've got many listeners around the world. In New Zealand, many of the schools start today or tomorrow after the Easter holidays. Some children will be on holiday, some will be at home. For parents who are listening thinking, gosh, I'm going to have 2 or 3 children at home. I've never home educated before. I don't actually know how I'm going to juggle my own work. We've got single parents listening who don't have the support of a husband at home, and they're having to work and they're having to juggle the education of their children. How much pressure is on parents, and do they need to feel that pressure, or do they need to just back off and just do the best they can?
I think the second one, back off and do the best that you can. So obviously kids are at different varying stages of their education. So if your kid is kind of towards exam period of time, we'll talk about what some practical things you can do at the moment in a moment. But actually, if you think about it, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to miss a few weeks of school. And so you need to balance out to yourself, what is more important? Is my relationship with my child more important? And if you think there's going to be conflict in that relationship by trying to get them to do a whole amount of learning, A, they're not going to be learning, and B, it's going to make your bubble more difficult to sustain itself. So I think you just need to be very, very realistic about what you can manage. So that's things like making sure that if they use, not all screen time is equal. So if they are using screens, make sure it's educational, sit them on Minecraft, Terraria, or whatever it is, or coding, whatever it is. So they can be occupied, you can get your stuff done, but you know they're doing something moderately educational. Be aware of a child's attention span. We shouldn't be expecting children under 10, to be focusing on one activity for more than 10 minutes on their own anyway. So set up the day with some kind of flexible rhythm and routine, and use technology for older children to do study groups as well. So have Zoom meetings online with your friends, with your child's peers, so they can do a study group online, and make sure that this is a good time. I don't know if you have WhatsApp groups with your kids, friends, parents, but send a message around to them and set it up. Get something going so they don't feel so isolated with their own learning. Lots of schools have provided stuff too, but use technology, I think definitely would be the thing to say here, is don't try and take on everything yourself. If you love being that homeschooling, home baking, sandal wearing mummy, then you do that. That floats your boat and that makes you well, then you do that. I would love to be able to do that. I can't do that. Technology is our friend. And so that's what my kids do. And then they come back to me, they know throughout the day that they can come back to me for different things. And I think if you can delineate a weekend day to a weekday, so we don't get this sense of kind of just one big fug, we can have a structure on school days where we kind of set out, this is where we're going to get our needs met for food, this is where we're going to get our needs met for connection, this is where we're going to get our needs met for learning, and that kind of suit what you can do, then that's all you really need to be doing at the moment. We're not teachers, some of you might be, I'm not a teacher, and so play to your strengths, do what you can do.
Yeah, and I think with children, I think definitely a bit of structure and routine really helps. And I like what you just said about differentiating between the weekend and the weekday. And I even found that for myself, I've had to do that. You know, I've still set my alarm for 6:30, 7 o'clock Monday through to Friday, because I don't want to get really complacent and staying in bed all the time. I want to get up, want to have some structure to my day. And I think understanding when your children are at their best to work as well, and that to encourage them, you know, because some of them are morning people, some of them are afternoon people, and if you can actually hone into them as people and understand them, I think that's also a good point to think about, isn't it?
Most definitely. And nobody knows your kids as well as you do, and that's why there is no one solid single practical answer to these questions, because there's so many variables. It really comes back down to relationships, knowing your child, knowing when you can push, when you need to back off, and maintaining the status quo.
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing that we can be doing at the moment. Learning's important, school is important, but so is our mental health right now.
Yeah. I've always found, like with mine, you maybe just encourage them to do a little bit for a few hours in the morning, and then when lunchtime comes, just be then more relaxed in the afternoon, because back then they're, as you say, their attention span's just gone, and they're past it by then. So get them at their very best time, get them when they're ripe, take advantage of that, and then let them chill out, and then we don't have that pressure on us either. It's good, you know, it works.
And what we can do in an hour compared to a room full of 30 kids in 6 hours, we can actually do quite good focused learning in a very short space of time. And kids are wired to learn. They're not going to not learn. Everything we do, they're programmed to be learning. So it's about extending the conversations that you have with them around other stuff to build in some of those learning conversations. And with parents, we do that naturally. You know, that's a skill that we have. Just play to that strength.
Yeah. Nice.
I love the way you normalise what's going on for all of us, because I think a lot of the way that we react as parents is fear or guilt. The children haven't got their normal routines. What's happening in my family is lots of arguments. It doesn't seem very normal. It doesn't seem very balanced. But actually what you're saying is, you know, just go with the flow, just be in the moment, just adapt, just change. This isn't going to last forever. And actually your relationships are more important than setting boundaries or routines around schooling and educational devices. I love the fact that you're normalising it all for us. And this is not going to go on forever, is it? This is not going to continue for, we hope not, well, we hope in New Zealand for not longer than a couple more weeks, but there's going to be constant change. How do we address changing back into a new structure, a new routine? Is it again about putting good conversation into place, talking the children through it, like you mentioned our Prime Minister doing so with us? What is the way we move forward when change comes again?
Slowly and compassionately, and in line with your understanding of your child's ability to take that information on. And I know that sounds kind of quite vague, but there is no more. It's about being as certain as you can. So this is what we're going to do next. This is going to how we're going to do it. This is when we're going to do it, and then reminding them just before we do it, and involving them in that conversation as much as possible, and talking about the feelings as well, not just the practicalities. But when you go back to school, it might feel a little bit odd that you're going to go and see all those people again, because you've just seen our faces for a while, and add some humour in there, you know. Or won't it be good to see all those faces again? How are you feeling about that? So always coming back to what's the feeling behind the action, because then you'll really understand what the emotional response is. And I think the only kind of thing that I want my children to come away from this experience with is that when everything turned to custard, we could be resilient. That's what we did. The ultimate lesson is the resilience. So when things get tough and things change very quickly, we can hold it together as a family. We can be resilient, and we're resilient because of these factors. And that having that whole kind of gentle modelling, step-by-step conversation is really helpful to that process. So what's happening? How are we going to do it? How do you feel about it? Get it done.
And that's beautiful. That's beautiful skills for life as well, isn't it? You know, teaching your children how to verbalise their feelings and to think about how they feel, to put a feeling next to, you know, an action. I think it's a great skill to teach them. And as you say, resilience, we are all learning so much resilience right now. So we're definitely honing that skill for sure.
It is. And I think it's harder for a lot of people. I work from home, so I actually don't leave our property for days on end normally anyway. So day to day, my life hasn't particularly changed, apart from I'm spending a lot more time with my kids, and my liberty has been taken away from me, which is quite a big thing for me, I think. And we mustn't, and that's what I was saying about the unconscious load, we mustn't underestimate what it feels like. Although our day to day hasn't changed significantly so much, those escapist fantasies that we have of like, oh, I'll just go to Fiji next year, or, you know, we probably never would, but, you know, it's an escapist fantasy. And now everything that we have outside of our bubble is, oh no, I can't, oh no, what's that going to look like? So focusing it in rather than looking outwards is the best thing that we can be doing now, and modelling that for our kids too.
And for parents listening, Emma, that are thinking, I get everything you're saying, all makes sense, but I've got a child really struggling with mental health issues that I've not seen manifest before, who would normally at this stage be going to seek the support of a GP or get help in counselling, but feel trapped in shutdown, lockdown. What would you say to them right now? What help can they get?
You can still reach out to your GP, and a lot of therapists are still doing Zoom consultations online. So if your child is old enough to engage in that, then do that. Or you can do that for advice on their behalf for younger children too. So we're still seeing people through online therapy. So don't stop seeking help. The help is there. It's just we've got to look at different, more creative ways to get it. And ultimately, just acknowledge. So parent the intention behind the behaviour. So that we might be seeing lots of different behaviours. In the first week, one of my oldest displayed some very bizarre behaviours, shall we say. And my first response was to step in and be punitive and kind of go, what on earth are you doing? That's absolutely disgraceful. You know better than that. And then I had to switch that part of myself off and flip into, oh my God, actually, this is really tough for him. What can I do to make it okay for him? So he stops trying to tell me how he's feeling by doing these very strange things. And I think that's it. If we can parent the intention rather than focus on the behaviour. So often those big behaviours are an indication, as you know, of something not feeling very right. Have the conversation about the feeling and seek help if you need to. GPs are taking referrals at the moment, and you can seek therapeutic support online at the moment too. So don't not do that. That's hugely important. If you're struggling, reach out. There is somebody there who can help.
And thank you so much for being honest, because we look at people like yourself who are qualified, you're a psychologist, you're obviously helping young people all the time. So it's nice to know, and this is our message to our listeners all the time, that we are all human. And even yourself, you could have handled your son one way, but you had to pull back and think about it. You're a mother at the end of the day. You're human. You're not just a psychologist. That's one of the hats you wear, but it doesn't mean you're going to get things correct and perfect all the time. And so it's a lovely message for our listeners as well.
80-20%, good enough is good enough. That's it. If you can be good 80%, you can stuff it up 20%, as long as you have the conversation around how to make it better. That's what I tell myself all the time.
Love it.
And Emma, one last question before we leave and close. It's been so good to have you on board with all your advice and wisdom. What is one tip you would like to leave our listeners before you go today?
Struggling, so it's coming back to relationships again, but it's make space for yourself. Show yourself some compassion. Whatever it is that gives you a sense of meaning, purpose and well-being, make space in your day to do it. It is a civic duty to look after yourself, because without you being okay, you can't look after your family. So self-care is not selfish. Self-care is mandatory. So whatever that is that helps you be okay so you can manage your bubble, find a space in the day to do it as a priority. That would be my message to people.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Emma Woodward. Thank you so much for giving us your time today, because we know you do have 4 young boys at home, so your life is pretty hectic as well. We really appreciate your time. You have given us, our listeners, some great tools, and even Sue and I, and we really, really just thank you.
Oh, it's been lovely speaking to you both. I think you're both wonderful women, and it's really nice to actually have these conversations with people. And also look at you two, who both have 4 children, and they're older than mine, and you both look sane, you both look functioning, and I know there's hope for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma.
Take